Hello, and welcome to the Battleship Brawl Companion. I'm Evil for Zergan, and in this episode, I'll be reviewing the Archangelsk Squadron by Chiphead. This is a 3-ship submission. All 3 ships are exactly the same except for this lettering that Chiphead has conveniently provided. Now, Chiphead has some comments on his own design, which I've linked in the blueprint post in the description. They're quite interesting, so you should read them also. But I'll be giving some additional comments in this video. Overall, as far as aesthetics go, Chiphead has said that he's designed these more for combat performance than for looks, and I mean, that's pretty much true. It basically does look like a barge with a bunch of guns on top of it, which of course makes it still 300% prettier than my own ships. But let's get to the performance. I'm gonna fire up the engines as usual here. So these are not particularly fast ships. We're sort of hovering between around 11 and 15 meters per second here. This is despite having about twice the engine power being as the first entry I reviewed in this series. I'd probably blame it on this round front. While this would probably work decently well in real life, it's quite disadvantaged from the depth's drag values. If we go to the drag view mode, you'll see that these sideways blocks at the front are really causing a pretty large amount of drag. So we see that the cross section in the front is quite high. All the ships are 66,666 materials. This one's a bit more since I've put some manual controls for later demonstration. Let's see, let's get out of build mode. Most of the propulsion is provided by these huge propellers at the back. Now the thing about these huge propellers, and also huge jets for air vehicles, which aren't in this tournament, is that they only need clearance directly behind the center block. So hiding these behind this metal is totally fine for these propellers. You can see that their force output is scaled to 100% despite these shrouds. The ship also has these small propellers mounted in these side pods. One thing to watch out for is that with jet engines, a huge jet engine is basically the same as 9 small jet engines. It costs 9 times as much, it draws 9 times as much power, sorry, and it produces 9 times as much thrust. However, the same is not true for these small propellers. If you compare the huge propeller to these small propellers, the huge propeller does cost 9 times as much, but it produces 20 times as much force at only 15 times as much power draw. So these small propellers are actually quite a bit less effective than they would look. He's got 4 propellers and 4 rudders in the back and 2 in the front, similar to how they were mounted on the Stalingrad. Now, one possibility with these side propellers is that you could put ACBs to aid your turning using differential thrust. If you key the ACBs so that the propellers on the inside of the turn are throttled down when you're making a turn, you can get a bit of extra turn rate that way. As far as I can tell, Chiphead has not done this in this particular design, but it's something you might keep in mind. Let's move on to protection. These are very lightly armored ships. We've got only a single layer of metal on the top and sides, a wood bottom, and alloyed turret wells. As is pretty common, the ammo is mounted in the keel, where shells are going to, especially aim-pointed shells, are going to have a hard time hitting. Because once they go into the water drag's going to slow them down, and they'll generally fall short of what they were aiming at. The AIs are mounted in these heavy armor gondolas under the hull, which both serve to protect the AIs and as a sort of ballast for the rest of the ship. You can see that Chiphead has put 2 per ship, so it's unlikely that they're going to be taken out before the rest of the ship. Now Chiphead has put aim point cards on the AIs, which I personally wouldn't recommend for this tournament, simply because so many people are going to be putting their ammo in difficult to aim at locations, just like the Archangelsks have here themselves. Now that's about it for protection. Now let's move on to the part which these ships really shine in, which is artillery. We've got 4 main guns and a set of 2 3-gun secondary batteries mounted on these what Menti referred to aptly as these winners' podiums. The secondary guns are totally unarmored. They're surrounded by HE pellets, so it's not going to be hard to take these out. We've got 1364 millimeters, a okay ammunition load of 7 boxes each, and likewise an okay 24 explosive material boxes. So pretty decent for a secondary armament, apart from the fragility. Now Chiphead has done something probably less common here, which is let's see if he's also done these with the secondaries. If I can find them. Oh yeah, here they are. So Chiphead has mounted the local weapon controls directly on the turrets, as opposing to having a probably more conventional off-board configuration. Now, normally I wouldn't recommend this, since if the turret gets hit by an EMP shell, the local weapon controller, it's hard to defend a local weapon controller on the turret itself from EMP damage. Whereas if it's mounted on the hull, you can use the very effective Faraday cage strategy. But in this tournament, there's no EMP is banned, so that's not a disadvantage. So it's definitely something to consider for a tournament like this. Now let's move on to the main armament, which is looks pretty standard, but there's some interesting details. Let's see if I can switch to one of them here. Like the secondaries, Chiphead has mounted a their local weapon controller on the turret themselves. These are really heavy guns, 2,000 millimeters, which is the maximum gauge possible. We've got a time since first impact fuse on them, which pretty much guarantees that they'll explode if they score a hit. 26 boxes, that's a pretty generous ammunition load, but only 35 explosive material and 13 hardening material. That's a bit on the light side for a gun of this diameter, this gauge. Part of the reason is that the autoloader layout is perhaps not quite as efficient as it could be. We don't have a pile of pellets that have 4 autoloader faces connected to them, which is generally what you should be going for. Still, at a sheer gauge of 2,000 millimeters, and given a generous amount of time to reload, you're going to be seeing a pretty huge amount of damage per hit from these main guns. Now, there's one more interesting thing about these guns. Not the guns themselves, but how they're laid out. If we zoom out a bit here, you'll see that this ship is not completely symmetric. We've got the 2 midship guns kind of in this diagonal configuration. This is called the en echelon configuration, and it was actually used in some real warships historically, particularly during World War I, including the first battle cruisers in history, the British Invincible class. Now, the reason for mounting with these guns this way, I'll demonstrate here, is that despite being mounted midships, these 2 guns can both broadside in both directions. And if you're meeting an enemy head-on or directly backwards, both guns can wait for it. Both guns can shoot that way also. As Chiphead mentions in his post, that's the reason he mounted the guns in this configuration. And that's also the reason the real-world equivalents mounted their guns in this configuration. Now, this configuration was not terribly successful in the real world because it turns out that when you mount your wing turrets this way and you're shooting across the beam of your own ship, having a bunch of muzzle blasts go off in the center of your own ship is not exactly great for your decks and superstructure. So, real ships eventually moved to the all centerline configuration for their main battery. But from the depths, there's no muzzle blast, so there's no problem here. Well, that's about all I've got to say for this contestant. Best of luck in the rest of the tournament, Chiphead, and I'll see you all in the next episode.